Your phone is in your hand, and you know exactly what you are doing. The deadline is tomorrow morning. You have known about this project for 3 weeks. For 20 of those days, your brain treated the task like a distant rumor, something that existed, technically, but not something that required your attention. Now it is 11 p.m., the house is quiet, and suddenly your mind is sharper than it has been all month. Your fingers are moving. Ideas are connecting. You are, for the first time since this assignment landed in your lap, actually working. But the real answer is far stranger than procrastination. You have probably called yourself lazy. Everyone does. The story we tell ourselves is simple. You lacked discipline, you wasted time, and now you are paying for it with a sleepless night. But that story misses something critical. Your brain was not failing you during those 20 days. It was following an ancient set of rules that never anticipated project management software, quarterly reports, or a world where tasks arrive weeks before anything bad happens if you ignore them. What you experience when a deadline ignites your focus is not a character flaw finally overcome by panic. It is a window into how your brain actually processes time, reward, and the strange weight of consequences that have not yet arrived. Here is what happens inside your skull when a deadline is far away. The task is abstract. There is no immediate cost to ignoring it, no visceral consequence, no tiger in the room. Your brain's reward system, which runs on a chemical called dopamine, does not fire for abstract future outcomes the way it fires for things that feel close and real. A finished project due in 3 weeks is a concept. A finished project due in 3 hours is an emergency. And your brain, which evolved to survive on a savanna where emergencies were the only deadlines that mattered, treats those two things as entirely different categories of experience. Psychologists have a name for this distortion. The further away a reward or consequence is, the less your brain values it, but the discount is not linear. It bends. A deadline 3 weeks out feels roughly as urgent as a deadline 3 months out, because your brain compresses the distant future into a meaningless blur. But as the deadline draws close and crosses some invisible threshold into the immediate, the value curve steepens sharply. What felt abstract on Tuesday becomes electrifyingly real on Thursday night. This is called hyperbolic discounting. It was first mapped by researchers studying how both humans and animals make choices across time. Pigeons will wait for a larger food reward unless the smaller reward is available right now. You are not so different from that pigeon. You prefer the immediate reward of not thinking about the deadline. You prefer the comfort of right now. And when the deadline finally crosses that threshold, something physical happens. Your amygdala, the part of your brain that scans for threats, finally registers the approaching consequence as real. It sends a signal that triggers a release of norepinephrine, a chemical cousin of adrenaline. Your attention narrows. Distractions that felt irresistible an hour ago, your phone, the refrigerator, the quiet hum of ambient anxiety that usually pulls you sideways, lose their grip. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for planning and focus, finally gets the neurochemical backup it needs to override your impulse to do literally anything else. You are not becoming a better version of yourself under pressure. You are becoming a chemically altered version of yourself. The deadline did not teach you discipline. The deadline drugged you into focus. This is where the first counterintuitive twist lands. Most people assume that deadline-driven productivity is a trade-off. You sacrifice sleep and peace of mind, but you get the work done. The research suggests something stranger. In a series of studies by the psychologist Piers Steele at the University of Calgary, who conducted one of the largest meta-analyses of procrastination research ever published, a clear pattern emerged. People who consistently rely on deadline pressure do not merely suffer more stress. They produce work that is measurably lower in quality, even when they believe they are performing at their peak. The urgency feels like clarity. It is not. What you experience as heightened focus is partly the elimination of alternatives. Your brain has finally decided that the cost of not working exceeds the cost of working, and partly the intoxicating effect of norepinephrine, which creates a subjective sense of sharpness that does not always correlate with actual quality. There is a classic finding in psychology that explains why this matters. In 1908, two researchers named Robert Yerkes and Yerkes-Dodson discovered something about the relationship between arousal and performance. Too little arousal, and you are bored and ineffective. Too much arousal, and you are panicked and error-prone. The sweet spot, they found, is somewhere in the middle, enough pressure to focus attention, but not so much that cognitive function degrades. This is the Yerkes-Dodson law, and it maps almost perfectly onto the deadline experience. When a deadline is too far away, arousal is too low, and you cannot start. When a deadline is on fire, arousal spikes past the optimal point, and though you feel alert, your working memory narrows, your capacity for creative problem-solving shrinks, and you become more likely to make the kind of mistake that only becomes visible the next morning when you read what you wrote. And yet, you keep doing it. Not because you are broken, but because the alternative, starting early, requires a skill your brain did not evolve to perform easily. Starting early means acting on a future consequence that feels abstract. It means generating your own urgency when there is none. It means doing something now so that a version of yourself who exists 3 weeks from now will suffer less. That future you is, neurologically speaking, a stranger. Brain imaging studies have shown that when you think about your future self, the same regions of the brain light up as when you think about another person entirely. Your brain does not treat future you as an extension of present you. It treats future you as someone else whose problems are not yet your concern. The deadline has to get close enough that future you becomes present you in a way your brain can finally recognize. This is where the modern world breaks the ancient wiring. Your brain evolved to handle consequences that arrived in minutes, hours, or at most a few days. The lion is either here or it is not. The storm is either approaching or it has passed. Seasons change slowly, but the daily threats were immediate. Now you live in a world where consequences are abstracted across weeks, months, and years. Retirement savings, career trajectories, relationship patterns, health habits. Your brain's threat detection system was never designed to register a consequence that far away. So it does not. And the result is that you spend most of your life treating critical long-term projects the same way you treat a deadline that still feels like someone else's problem. What makes this particularly cruel is that modern work culture has built itself around the assumption that you can manage this on your own. You are given a deadline, a project management tool, and an open office plan designed to interrupt you every 11 minutes. You are told to be self-motivated, self-directed, self-disciplined. But the very structure of modern knowledge work strips away most of what your brain needs to engage with a task before it becomes urgent. There is no immediate feedback. There is no visible progress. There is no social accountability until the deadline is close enough that someone else might notice you have not started. You are not failing at self-discipline. You are being asked to override a neurobiological system using tools that system was never built to respond to. So, what do you actually do with this? The research does not suggest that you should eliminate deadlines. Deadlines are genuinely effective at creating action, and for some people, they are the only reliable ignition switch. But the research does suggest something more practical. If your brain only engages when a task feels immediate, the solution is not to learn to care about distant tasks. The solution is to make distant tasks feel immediate. One of the most striking demonstrations of this principle came from the behavioral economist Dan Ariely. In a study he conducted with his students at MIT, he gave one group complete freedom to set their own deadlines for 3 papers across a semester. A second group had evenly spaced, externally imposed deadlines. A third group could choose their deadlines, but face no penalty for missing them. The students with evenly spaced deadlines performed best. The students with complete freedom performed worst. But the most telling finding was this. When students were allowed to choose their own deadlines, those who chose evenly spaced deadlines performed nearly as well as the externally imposed group. The act of creating a structure, of making a distant consequence feel real by breaking it into smaller, nearer ones, was itself protective. This points towards something practical. Your brain needs deadlines, but it does not need the big one looming at the end of the month. It needs smaller deadlines, closer ones, deadlines that sit just inside the window where consequences feel real. If you have a project due in 4 weeks, your brain will treat week 3 as abstract. But if you tell someone you trust that you will send them a draft by Friday, Friday will feel real. The social accountability converts a distant abstraction into an immediate, embodied commitment. Your amygdala, which could not care less about a due date 3 weeks from now, cares very much about the prospect of letting someone down in 3 days. This is not a productivity hack. This is a neurological workaround. Your brain is not going to evolve past hyperbolic discounting in your lifetime. The architecture that makes distant deadlines feel unreal is the same architecture that makes you jump when you hear a loud noise, that makes you crave sugar when you are tired, that makes you fall in love with people who are nearby instead of people who are theoretically perfect. It is deep. It is not going anywhere. The only question is whether you work with it or against it. And here is the final turn, the one that brings this back to something you actually feel. The real cost of deadline-dependent productivity is not the lower quality work. It is not the spike in errors, not the narrowing of creative options, not even the sleep you lose on the night before something is due. The real cost is what the pattern does to your sense of who you are. Every time you wait until the deadline is on fire, you reinforce a story about yourself. That you cannot be trusted to act without external pressure. That you are fundamentally undisciplined. That your best self only emerges in crisis. You start to believe that the frantic, sleep-deprived, norepinephrine-fueled version of you is the only version capable of producing anything of value. And that belief, more than any deadline, is what traps you. That belief is what keeps you scrolling when you should be starting, keeps you waiting for the fire, keeps you mistaking panic for purpose. Your phone is in your hand and you know exactly what you are doing.